Welcome to the TufFish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Meg Dendler. Meg, thank you so much for being on this show.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I am so excited because not only have you written multiple genres, but you've also written about kitties, and that's just a
Yes.
love. So, but I would love for you to start actually with how did you get into writing to begin with?
I have been, I think a lot of us are just born writing. I had a picture book win a contest in fifth grade. I always say win a
Oh,
contest. I have a thing that I won. I don't know if I was like first place or whatever, but to me, I won. And I made up little stories to go with it throughout the year, so this has always been a thing. And it was actually became Bianca, the Brave, Frail, and Delicate Princess. I kept trying to sell it as a picture book and it didn't work because it wasn't a picture book anymore. Um, it's very different now than it was, in the 70s when I wrote it. But the idea stayed with me. Um,
that's
and
so
I,
cool.
was publishing articles all through the 90s. I used to do interviews. I had a column that with religion and spirituality.com. So it wasn't really movie reviews. It was more like what what's the heart of this movie? Why should you see this movie? What are you going to get from it? And that was a lot of fun. I just should get back into that again now that I live someplace in a big city where I could actually do movie previews again. We moved in a little town and that wasn't possible. Uh, and then the books, I was a teacher for a number of years. I actually have a master's degree in early childhood. So, children and books, it was a natural metamorphosis, a next step to be
Yeah.
publishing these kids' books.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So actually, would you talk a little about Bianca's book? That is so cute that it started such an early age,
It
and
did.
it blossomed with you. So
It's the
please.
brave, frail, and delicate princess is her thing. That everybody just thinks she's helpless. She was born, and then her mother died when she was born, and she was born very sickly, and the father has never recovered from that. So he won't, she's basically in a tower. She can't leave the castle. He won't let her interact with anybody. And that has stayed the same. And a dragon comes. And because the knights and everybody have not handled it, she realizes she's the princess. She's going to have to go do this. And she does not feel frail or delicate. She fights in the castle with fake monsters and pulls swords off the, knights in the castle. So she does not believe any of this about herself, but she has to prove it. And she has never had a chance to prove it, to even leave the castle. And, you know, I don't want to get into too much of the plot, but it's, to go get this dragon, which is who we have on the cover, our little dragon there. The second book of this is actually coming out in February. I wasn't necessarily
Ooh,
planning a sequel, but sometimes that just happens.
yes,
The
that's so
story is
true.
just there.
Yeah.
And what people like, they tell you which ones they like. And so you say, hey, more of that. In the original book, she kills the dragon because he says she's fat. Now that's very 1976 sort of humor and logic. It is not like that at all anymore. I think in college I took a science fiction writing class and I even did a whole science fiction version of this same kind of story. So it's been, as you say, it's been growing with me. It's been evolving and changing. And is it a short story? Is it they don't picture books like that are fairy tale and big, beautiful illustrations, which is what I wanted to do. That's not what is published right now. That's just not the trend. So you're not going to get anybody to do that for you. That was sort of the first step in what else it could be instead of that.
But you've mentioned something that I think is really important is that you, no matter when you start a story, you might need to come back to it and you might need to rewrite it, or you might
Yeah.
need to take a different approach with a different character, or you might realize that what you thought might have worked when you first went around, you might say, I like a lot of this, but I need to make some other changes. And to be open to those changes, to basically allow the power of the draft, really is how
Yes.
I affectionately call it, is the power of the draft. It's actually your friend,
Yep.
and it allows you to just let your ideas flow. So would you talk a little bit more about like how that process might work for you, where you're
Yeah.
taking that idea from the beginning of something that you might not even have more than just an idea and a blank cursor or a blank sheet of paper,
Yeah.
and kind of talk a little bit through that process?
Sure. And I think it's a little maybe different for me with the skills that I have than for other people, because you will always hear people say, don't edit as you go. just write. That does not work for me. I actually have, I don't want to call that this is my day job, but my side job, I edit and proofread for other people. This is a skill set I have. So that is one of my favorite parts of the process. Is the revising, is the revising and the editing, because you're taking this kind of ball of clay that you've sort of put together and you're making it so much better, and you're finding out more about the character. Ooh, did I talk about what things smell like? All of that comes into play. So for me, things evolve as they go. All right, so we'll do the origin story. So we've got Why Kimba Saved the World, which was the first one I published. So you've got our little spaceship here, because that's who she's saving us the world from. Cats are aliens, and they want to invade. So you've got Kimba's this little house cat who's finding out about all this, and how does she feel, and will she protect her family? One of my taglines is, "Would your cat save you?"
And this is for the Cat in the Mirror series. Yeah.
Yes, this is the Cats in the Mirror series. There's 5 of them now, and it started out as a little short story about, because this our real cat Kimba, she really is our cat. We found them in a box when they were 2 days old.
Aww.
They still had their little cords attached
Aww.
and were barely alive, and hand raised them. So they're very weird. Hand raised cats don't know how to cat. No one's trained them. They haven't learned how to cat. So they're very weird. So we started, well, she's just an alien. This is why she's so weird. She's just here witnessing us and observing us and reporting back. And that started to evolve, and it got bigger and bigger. And I wanted it to be for really early readers. And some SCBWI conference, I got a critique on it. And she said, I think this is bigger. Because at that age, it has to be very sort of, the Dick and Jane kind of thing. Very simple story.
Right.
I think you could take this bigger. And so I worked on that. And then one day I just sat down and said, all right, what are all the things that could happen? What are all the things within this character's life and around them that could happen? And I just started making notes. I didn't judge them. I didn't, say, oh no, that's stupid. I just wrote. And well, we have all these other cats. At the time, I think we had 6 cats. As I say, we found them in a box. They weren't intentional. We didn't say, oh, we need some more cats. And one of our cats, when we moved to Houston, had gotten lost. He'd run off one of the first days, which they sometimes do. But he came back. We found him. So we had all these cats. What are all the adventures that these cats could have? And by the time I was done, I didn't know what the stories were going to be, but I had Vacation Hero. So Hero got her own book, Little Tuxie like yours, who is Kimba's littermate. And then we have 2 that are my daughter's cats. Oops. So we have Miss Betty Cat's Revenge, because she doesn't like the little kittens. And Slinky Steps Out, so it's her going to college with my daughter, which she did. I didn't know what they were going to be about necessarily, but those titles were there, that they each would get their own book. And, this is how it was going to progress, how the stories were going to grow. And then, of course, you have to have a Christmas book. If you're going to have a series, you need a Christmas book. So we have Kimba's Christmas and her adventures there. And the cat who had run away and come back is like a wise uncle within the series, because he's the alien spy that sort of teaches them what they need. You work all these cats into this story, and it's completely ridiculous, and people seem to really enjoy it, and I love writing them.
But what you've just also alluded to is that you might have even just had the title that came out, or a couple of characters that you knew felt right to be a part of it in some way. They may not necessarily, you might not know exactly how they're going to show up, but you you just allowed the creativity and let it kind of see, well, what might happen here, or where this is going, and allow the writing to take you someplace versus necessarily boxing it in and saying it has to do this. I mean, I get how do you feel about outlining and plotting versus writing with the flow?
I sometimes outline halfway through. I always, in the editing, go back and do, like Vacation Hero takes place exactly within a week. We are on vacation, and she gets to have her little vacation up on the mothership and stuff. So it's very, linked in this time frame. So I will often be started on it. I don't do a full outline before I write.
I don't either. So that's okay.
It doesn't work for me. It's very limiting. But, I think, when I came up with all those titles, when I sat down and did that big brainstorming, and I had Miss Fatty Cat's Revenge, because, oh boy, Miss Samantha hated them. Her name is not really Miss Fatty Cat, but In my book, she is. And I didn't know what it was going to be about. And I couldn't have known what it was going to be about because we hadn't gotten there yet in our lives. So if you are from Arkansas at all, you know what the background is on this photo. It's a very important landscape in Arkansas. Well, I didn't know anything about this when I came up with those titles. It could not have been an outline I could have put together. And they go to a place as Turpentine Creek Wildlife Refuge, which is someplace I started volunteering in 2014. Again, I couldn't have known any of that. None of that was part of my life at that point in time. So if I tried to force that book too early, none of those things would have worked out or been there or, made any sense. And even in the last one, Slinky steps out. I knew she would go to college with my daughter. That's just where the world, that was coming in the world for their lives. But I couldn't know where she was going to go to school or how all those things would have been. You have to let it, and you definitely have to let it simmer.
Mm-hmm.
The people that put out a book every 3 months, I think that can't possibly be the best book you could have done. And maybe that's okay with you, that you just want that product out. But when I come back to something after I heard someone say, literally put it in the freezer if you have to, let it chill, let it rest. Now for me, that usually happens when it's off with beta readers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get it to a point where I'm super happy and like, we're ready. And then I'll send it out to people to read.
Yep.
And that for me is also that chill space.
Mm-hmm.
So when I come back to it in a month, 2 months with their thoughts and comments, then it tends to grow and branch out and become a bigger thing than what I started with. Because I always have fabulous ideas. Oh, I wish, this had happened, or I wish that had happened, or there's not enough, I know they're going to be okay. So you need somebody in peril in this scene because I know the main characters are going to be okay. No one's going to die, they're kids' books.
No, but that's a really great point. And like you with editing, I'm a developmental editor. So I'm reading from that standpoint of, looking what's happening, where are the holes, or what do we need to do. But I encourage my writers to take that break. Let me do my thing, you do yours, and you trust that when you come back through, gaps will start to close because you're getting additional insights and your writing has improved. Your ability to tell this story has grown just because you have kept going, and you've either had conversations or you've kept going, but then you came back through and you could see things. So that space in between, I think that's so important. I mean, even if you're writing a blog, write your blog, walk away, come back to it. I mean, really.
That'll help you catch the typos too.
Exactly. I mean, and reading it out loud, I also think helps, especially with dialogue, because you're reading it, you're listening to different pieces, and you'll catch the typos, but you'll also realize, hey, wait a minute, should that be a contraction or not, type of thing. So yeah, I love how you just described all of that so much, and that all the kitties got represented in the books. That is so cool.
I have one who I think she's starting to bang on the door outside because I shut her out, but we have a newer one that showed up in our yard one day when we lived in Eureka Springs. We thought she was a bobcat. She's a brown spotted tabby, and she does not have her own book yet. And
but the magic word
periodically, she periodically lets me know that she is not represented when she's in on these conversations. She'll come walk across the screen.
My kitties will do that too. I'm surprised my girl Mishu isn't like Zoom bombing us right now, because she does that all the time.
Mishu, you're welcome to Zoom bomb us. I will not mind at all.
But you talked about something too that I think is really powerful, and that's leveraging the power of the beta readers or the group, the feedback, the critiquing, or that kind of piece. Would you talk a little bit more about how you identified the right people for your betas?
I was very fortunate. There's a long story to it, so I will do the cut to the chase. First of all, go to all the writers' conferences you can. Everything local that is a price you can afford, go. You will learn something. You will meet somebody. And one of those that I went to when we first moved to Arkansas, a lot of the writing I did when we lived in Houston, but the actual publication was all done when we lived in Arkansas. So that was sort of my writing outward community. Those were the people. And I found a publisher, a small indie publisher, and started talking to them about an adult novel that I actually had written once we'd moved. And this relationship with them developed. And I became an editor for them, and that was part of it, was helping them edit, because they found out I had that skill. But also they ran a critique group, so I was invited to come and visit that critique group, and it's all people who are very serious about their writing. And none of them over the years, I don't think anybody has been a children's writer, but it's not about that necessarily.
Right.
And things I presented are adult things as well, but they understand it's for kids. And a lot of times they'll say, well, I don't know if this is just a adult kid thing when they don't like something. Like, I'm not going to spend a page describing the scene. You don't do that in kids books.
Exactly.
You give it some what does it look like, what does it smell like, and you get out of there.
Yep.
But that to find that group of people, you don't always have to agree with them. There's people I know don't agree with my criticism of their stuff and my critiquing, and I don't agree necessarily with things they'll tell me. But within that, there's always some gems, even if it's just a word change choice. There's always things that they are in my head when I write. Think, oh, nope, Nancy's going to call me on repeating that word 3 times in that page. They all have their things that they, really pick at, and they become part of that voice in your head not as you write, but as you edit, as you revise.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to make sense? Someone's going to call you on it if it doesn't make sense. It also forces you to have pages ready. There's an accountability there to having a group of people, to having beta readers. I have one little girl who's a big fan of Bianca, and her mom is a writer friend of mine. So she's going to beta read this new one. Cool. That, it's not coming out to February, but the reality is, and maybe people don't understand this, even if they're listening to you, you have that book ready 4 or 5 months before that release. You have your cover pretty well done. You have already had people read it. So I'm already at that, getting ready to send it out to beta readers, even though February is our release time. But that's where we are.
Yep.
And if I say to her mom, okay, I'm going to have it to you before school starts, so you have time to read it before school starts, I've got to do that now. Sure. I have set that timeline for myself. When my group meets on Monday night, I know I need to have 5 pages clean, ready, reasonably pretty. Doesn't mean that they'll definitely change after that, but I need to have them ready. And you can't get lazy about that. And a lot of people come without pages sometimes. I mean, no one would yell at me if I showed up without pages. But for me, if I'm going to say, this is what I do, I'm a full-time writer, you got to have those pages. You got to be ready.
I love how the fact that you're saying, like, helping to frame what that draft might look like for getting it to your beta. That is it the one that you actually go to publication with? I mean, it's not.
No.
It's the one. It's one that you feel really good about sharing.
Yes.
I liken the first draft as something that a lot of times it's you figuring out how that's going to move, and you really don't need the first round. Even the first few rounds are really between you and the piece of paper, you and the story coming together, and then you start to bring in different types of feedback, different types of help to bring this story, this book to life in a greater way. And yes, that to me is, I think, the beauty of a book too, is that yes, the writer has created it. They authored, they had the idea, they put the words down, they brought the story to life, but it still wasn't done in a vacuum. They still had support from others to truly bring this particular story book to life.
I remember early days, I was publishing a lot of articles with the same magazine and working with the same editor, who I actually continued to work with. She's freelance now, and I had her edit one of my books when it came time. And she had made some change in something we were doing, and I was like, oh, I mean, I think that's what people realize. Even in a magazine, nothing goes to print exactly the way you submit it. There's always going to be little tweaks and changes. I said, oh, maybe when I'm ready to win a Pulitzer Prize, I won't need an editor. She said, oh, no, you'll thank your editor.
That's right. That's right.
Because you had an editor in that thing that won you that thing. So that going back and forth is always hugely important.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I would love for us to switch gears a little bit because
Okay.
you are a multi-genre author.
I am.
And so it's not just children's books or young readers. We're talking about you've written not just in the magazines and such, but you have a book that's sci-fi that is out, the Tigran Chronicles. Would you please
Yes.
talk about that? Because again, hello, Kat. I mean, we're here. So
Absolutely. Well, we'll give it 2 seconds, and I don't have a hardcover of this one, so I'm gonna have to pull her off the shelf. When I talked about the book that I was talking about with the local publisher,
oh
that
yeah.
is an adult title. So this was the first one, and it's At the Corner of Magnetic and Maine, and it's a paranormal women's fiction, and I had no intention of writing it. We had gone to a little diner in our town, and I posted about this cute little diner, and everything's got Coca-Cola on it, and isn't it adorable? And then I added to the tweet, I said, oh, it's At the Corner of Magnetic and Maine. And a writer friend said, ooh, that's a great book title. I went, oh man, it is. That's a great book title. And so I had sat right then in that moment, and I do whole workshops about this, in that moment where that little ting was there, I wrote a whole scene. So who's your main character going to be? Who would be in this diner? She's a ghost. This town of Eureka Springs is their whole thing is paranormal stuff and ghosts and things. And this book evolved. I had no intention of writing an adult book. And I kind of thought it was YA, and it, evolved. So I had already sort of broken that I'm only going to write children's books when Tigran Chronicles came out. And it was the same thing. I went to a writing workshop. I had no intention. I was just supporting the local author that was doing this writing workshop. I wasn't looking for any new ideas. And it was a historical fiction kind of writing, which I also don't write. And she had us think of a scene in a very important place that we in our lives had been to. Something, where we had been there. It was personal to us. And as a teenager, I went to Amsterdam. I visited Anne Frank's house.
Oh, wow.
I stood in her bedroom, and I was about the same age at the time,
wow.
as she had been. So it was very impactful to me.
Yeah.
And then we were supposed to do all these things, with this idea. And so I ended up with this other character who would end up in that same situation, that would have to hide for no other reason than that someone hated them. Not they hadn't done anything wrong. And tigers are a big affinity of mine. I actually spend time with them. I volunteer at a rescue place near my town. So
that's awesome.
I thought, what if, it was this sort of tiger person who had to hide? And that is the opening of the book. And I wrote it right there in that workshop. And again, no idea that was going to happen, where it was going to go. So this is the newest one. This is the Tigran Chronicles.
That's gorgeous cover. It's such a gorgeous.
And pay your cover designers. Always pay your cover designers. Don't do it yourself. That will be my other thing. All of these are designed by someone else. Bianca's cover is between my daughter and the cover designer. They work together on it.
Oh, that's amazing.
She's an artist, yes. But this one, I knew what I wanted it to look like. She helped me to make it beautiful. And it ended up being this almost 100,000 word book.
Wow.
Which was not on the agenda, was not part of the plan. It has sequel halfway done. It has little short stories, because at the end you sort of have 3 years and then a little conclusion. Well, there's a lot of things in there that I'm doing little short stories on that are just sort of alluded to, that I can maybe do as freebies or whatever, Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love how you let an idea just kind of come to you and then stayed open to what might happen. And then you really ended up writing something you were passionate about.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something I think is really important, is when you are really excited about what you've written, whatever it is, because when you're excited about it, then you want to talk about it. You want to share it with others. It doesn't feel like you're selling or you're promoting. It feels like I'm excited about something that I've created, and I can't wait to share it with you, because it just was so much fun, and your joy and your enthusiasm comes through. And it's also a big piece of what becomes attractive about that book when you hear an author talk about it, because they were so excited, and it's like, yeah, I want to read that too, because that sounds so cool.
And the reality is, and again, people don't always get this, it's at least a year of your life. that you're committing to this, whatever it is you're writing. My husband always wants me to write romance stuff because it sells, so he's the business side of things. Well, if we write that, I said, but I don't read romance. That's just not in general. I love Outlander and things like that, if it has more to it, but just romance books, it's not my thing. Why in the world would I want to spend a year of my life, and then promoting it and then trying to sell it to people? You have to go with what sparks that for you, what makes you say, oh, I want to know more about that. I want to write about that. I want to tell other people about that. In the Tigran Chronicles, it's really dealing with, would we be nicer if these creatures were half human? There's something going on right now. It's the Big Cat Public Safety Act, and it's trying to get before the Senate right now. And all it really is saying is hands off the baby tigers. You can be grandfathered in to have it in your yard and be safe, which is still terrifying that your neighbors can have tigers in their yards, which they can in most states. But to remove the things where it's harmful, where we're pulling cubs away from their mothers 2 days after they're born, if not sooner, so people can pet them and we can make money. And, there's a whole dark side of what happens to them afterward, because it only lasts for a few weeks that they can be in that situation. So, if this creature was, I tell you, she ends up hiding like Anne Frank. So I think that gives you a little bit of
context.
No,
Yeah.
we aren't nicer to them. We aren't better to them. They're still commodities. And, can we do better as human beings with the creatures of the earth,
So what kind of research did you feel like you needed to do to amplify the story? Or was it something that you just stayed in the realm of fiction and create, because it's sci-fi, so that lends itself to have, you have to have world building, you have to create the space of what you want that to be, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to research. It means that you have to create structure and systems and such. But did you research pieces to help create that, or did you just rely on imagination only?
A little bit, but I did, there's things I already knew because I volunteer at this refuge and I worked as a docent. So there's things that I learned within that were already knowledge to me, the rescues that they had done and what the situations they had rescued these. And it's more than just tigers. They have lions and cougars and bears, but that have been rescued from really horrible situations. Some of them, it's, the stories are just horrific sometimes of what they were not, they were able to be saved, but not everyone was. So that was already part of my knowledge going into it. But I did, it's set in 2172, because yes, as you talk about world building, I have these creatures being part of the human experience for a long time before they turn on them. So you have to have generations, you have to have time. But I did look up, I spent actually a lot of time on climate change.
Okay.
Because if you're going to set it in 2172 on Earth, it's not sci-fi other planet. This is all that's happening. It's happening on Earth. So what kind of things are going to be different in 200 years? How are things going to have changed? And I have some magical solutions coming in. Somebody create some lovely carbon thing that helps the worst of it be bad. But at one point, I drop things subtly, some of it. I refer to Sacramento as a coastal city. Now, people in California are going, wait, no, well, I'm seeing waters coming in and things changing over hundreds of years.
But this is also world building.
Yes.
That is exactly, but this is designing it the way you want it to feel in this book. So, so be it, really.
Right. That, it's not catastrophe and everything's on fire, but the second book actually is, a lot of it is set in Australia, because I have quite a fascination with Australian animals and zoos and the things that they're doing there. So I thought, oh, well, what kind of creatures, half human, half kangaroo? I mean, what can you come up with over there, But you do have to still deal with, if you're going to set it on Earth, you have to answer those questions for your readers.
Very
true. When I was writing a lot of this, it was when Australia was basically on fire. Everything was burning. Millions of animals were dying. So in 200 years, what's that going to look like? Is it going to have gotten better? Is it going to have gotten worse? Are things extinct? I have several animals extinct in the wild that people might not like the sound of, but this is the realities of where we may be headed. So, you know, you have to address that in your world building. If I think that's why sometimes people do just do another planet, because then they can do whatever they want to.
Understood. Understood.
Yeah, you can just say, this is my world. Deal with it.
So I've got one more question for you before we wrap
Yes.
up, which is, you know, when you're writing, when you're choosing a topic, when you're writing, you know, whether it's short stories or a sequel or another part of a series altogether, is there something that when you feel it, even when you're writing something might be sad or challenging, is there something that comes out that you feel joy from, that you can say, this still makes me really happy to have created this, even if it came from a place that was maybe more challenging or even dark in some ways?
Yeah, Tigran Chronicles has some it's PG-13. It is, I had a parent very excited when she's like, come out. I'm like, no, not a cat book. This is not part of that series. This is maybe for teenagers, but it deals with some very serious issues. And there was not always pleasant to write them. And I knew if I was going to have bad guys, they had to be bad. They couldn't just be, they had to be bad. You had to hate them. But what you think in the end is this going to evoke something in the reader? Is this going to make them feel what I'm feeling right now? Is this going to make them think? Is it going to give them that experience that you want them to feel in that moment? How you want them to feel for that main character? How you want them to feel about that villain? And you watch the beta readers come back. I have one gal who loves that kind of book, so she read it for me, I think, a few times. And at one point she said, "Oh, yay, we got him!" If you're getting that feedback from them, you've given them that experience, that moment, that woohoo of, escape or conquering or whatever. And then, that's happy. That's good. That's the point of reading. If it was just all vanilla, nobody would care.
Good
You
point.
have to, you have to have some peril. You have to, what's the joke? Put them up the tree and throw rocks at them. You've got to have your character experience things. And if they're all good, it's maybe a picture book.
Fair enough.
It's
Yeah,
not a novel. That's got to have crisis. It's got to have intrigue. It's got to have bad guys and good guys and things that happen.
absolutely. Meg, this has been so cool and so much fun. I am so glad you've been on the show. Would you
Thank
please
you.
let listeners know where they can connect with you and where they can get your books?
Sure. And I'm everywhere. You can certainly go to megdendler.com, and it's Dendler. I sell books through that. I have a Square, what you use at everybody's store now that you go to. So you're not giving me your credit card. Don't worry. If you want signed copies, I am what's called wide. So my books are in all the different stores. Everybody has Amazon. I'm working on some links in the back that some sites don't like. So we're tidying up that ebook thing. We didn't talk about, so I'll give them 10 seconds. I do have dog books. They go with the cat books. Our dog, Max's Wild Night and Dottie's Daring Day. This is our daughter's dog. So they're based on the real ones. So if you don't like cats, I don't know why they'd be watching your podcast if they don't like cats. That's why I wrote them, because I had people say, don't you have dog books? I like dogs. So we do. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and the links are all right at my website. I'm pretty much everywhere. I haven't tackled TikTok yet. I guess that's the next new one that we're supposed to use. I don't know.
Meg, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.